Shadi Al-Atallah, your show Fistfight just opened up last week at Guts Gallery in Hackney, London. You join us here today for Radio Juxtapoz in Gasworks Studio in South London. Thank you so much for joining us and for agreeing to sit down and do this interview today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for coming.
How do you feel post-show? It's been almost a week. In fact, actually a week today that it opened. How do you feel post-show? Is it a good feeling?
Definitely a good feeling. A bit of relief, really. I did kind of have an intense few weeks right before, hand-in time. So it feels good to just, I guess not be in the studio 24/7, even though I enjoyed it. It was a bit intense and a bit taxing, I think. Like, a lot of my energy was spent on that show, so it just feels like a relief a bit. But I still have a bit of adrenaline. Like, I feel like fight or flight mode still.
What's an opening night like for you then? This isn't your first show. This isn't your first solo. Does it get easier for you?
Probably not, to be honest. I think my first show was the easiest show. I just didn't think about the opening. I was really excited. But I think the more it happens, like, I don't feel like I'm building these muscles to, face it. I feel like they're getting weaker a little bit. So I think this opening was the toughest one for me.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think maybe a lot of my energy was just spent on making the show. Maybe it was particularly an emotional time while I was making it. Like, I spent a lot of time in the studio just crying. Like, it was a really cathartic process, I think. So it was intense. And I think those emotions just built up towards the private view, and I was like, I'm gonna be perceived, like my work will be perceived and I'll be perceived as a person, and it just felt intense, I think.
A lot to unpack in that one.
Definitely.
Look, I tell you what, we'll come back to the process, we'll come back to that experience of painting. There's just a couple of bits of interesting language that you use there. But let's talk about the show itself, Fistfight. The work itself looks incredible, and the work that we're sitting in front of just now is really, really powerful. It's really raw, and it feels incredibly vulnerable. And to hear that you were spending a lot of time in the studio in floods of tears, it almost doesn't surprise me, if I'm entirely honest. Tell me about how the body of work came together.
I think that was directly after I had worked on this show, the works up on the wall here, which was for the CCA, Goldsmith CCA show on Unruly Bodies, and I was looking at kind of intimate moments. Also, there was another show that I was working towards, which is Dreaming of Home in the Leslie Lohman Museum in New York. And kind of both these shows were I was just thinking about intimacy and just bodies coming together.
So are you working on multiple shows at one time?
So those were group shows. So I was just making kind of just one piece per show, really. I mean, for this one, I made maybe 4 or 5, and then picked the best 2, I think, that felt representative. So yeah, I was definitely working on a few at the same time. But I think this body of work inspired the Fistfight stuff. I think it was an interesting shift in going from painting like singular figures, just like one figure kind of in different poses, different movements, and then going from that to doing 2 people and like showing that interaction, intimacy between them. And I think it just happened organically because I started painting 2 figures, and the relationship between them, it kind of like it went from intimate to violent.
It started at intimate and then went to the violent. That's interesting, because the way that I was reading it or looking through it kind of went the other way.
Yeah, I mean both, right? So I think it's like shifting from intimacy to violence, because in my head these things live in the same place. In a way.
Are they interconnected?
Yeah, definitely.
How could you describe that? I know that the thing is, and it's always hard for artists, because it's like I've described it with my work. You've seen how that is, but for you, could you verbalize it?
I think I can. I think the violence that I'm kind of depicting in these paintings isn't unconsensual violence. I wouldn't say it's like BDSM or anything, but it's kind of bordering that. It's that kind of violent emotion that you feel, almost like animalistic in a way. So kind of digging into our caveman side. I was reading a lot about like children's studies and how controlled violence or rough play is such an integral part of our development. And I found that interesting because as adults we look down on violence. Even wrestling as a sport is kind of seen as like lowbrow, like it just has a lot of negative associations, but it's somehow necessary in a way for us to express our frustrations using like controlled violence, so consensual violence or controlled violence.
And we're talking about this in a real physical way, not in an emotional or mental way.
Both. I think our need for the physical stuff comes from our need to just let go of really difficult emotions.
Are you a violent person?
I'm not really that violent. I mean, I do lean towards like physical things, right? But I just think I think back on my childhood, and I was a bit of a violent kid, I would say. I was leaning towards not necessarily harming people for fun. No, that's definitely not where I'd categorize myself. But I think me and my cousins or his cousins, and I just remember us, wrestling a lot. We're like trying to pick fights with people. And I don't know where that comes from, but it just felt natural. As a kid, you don't need to see these things. You don't need to watch wrestling to want to wrestle. And I find that interesting because even animals wrestle. So wrestling feels like it's one of the most kind of intrinsic parts of us that we suppress or hide away to like be civil.
But then with this, it's this idea of wrestling, but it's not in an arena that these conflicts take place. They're very much in a domesticated setting. What kind of, or even safe spaces. Like, what is the function for you then of this kind of almost intentional jarring and kind of bringing it into these kind of more claustrophobic, familiar spaces where it doesn't become about spectacle, it's something else?
Yeah, it's definitely, I think I tried to move it away from spectacle because I think when I was watching those kind of WWE, clips while I was doing my research, I felt like a lot of it was about like spectatorship, the audience and performance and performing for somebody or for the purpose of entertainment. So I felt like leaving it in the arena would just make it that, like something for the sole purpose of entertainment. But when I shifted it to the domestic or the personal, I think you just look at the idea of wrestling in a different way. So I think it might bring the audience to think about it in a more kind of personal way. Like the viewer might interact with it personally or interpret it personally. Like a lot of the conversations I had at the PV were really interesting. I mean, despite like initially dreading it, I think
you end up having a good time.
Yeah, I did. I really did. And I had like amazing conversations with people who connected with the work personally. And I think when that happens, it just feels like a bit magical in a way, because you don't like view your work as, like I said, like I didn't want it to be perceived, but then when it was kind of a positive thing. I worry that people like misinterpret my work because it can be a bit, like I am depicting violence in domestic settings and domestic violence.
Those two words are often used in a different context.
Great words to put next to each other.
So for clarity, this isn't a show about domestic violence?
Definitely not.
Glad we cleared that up. It's funny when you say about misinterpreting the work or misreading it. Some artists will come in and have, this is about this is what this is. Where do you sit in that kind of spectrum of either total abstraction, it is what you make, everything is what you make it to be, as, or the other side? Where are you in that sort of line? I'm
definitely at the like interpret it however way you want kind of realm, just not the domestic violence, root kind of realm.
That's fair. I get the sense from some of the pieces, particularly, there's a sense of emergency in there. What's triggering that sense of emergency for you? The clouds of smoke, the fire, things like this. There's an element of danger in there outside of the conflict.
Yeah, I think when I was working on them, I definitely felt a sense of urgency while I was making them. Like I was just going through one crisis after the other. It just feels like a really intense therapy session with yourself in a way, because it's so intense, and my process really relies on kind of sleep deprivation, which is a bit much, but I
sadomasochistic.
a little bit, right? Because initially I was exploring restriction or restricting my body, but then I realized maybe what I need to do is push my body to the maximum limits to see what I can come up with. Because I'm a really self-critical person, and I think that self-criticism translates into like overworking on the paintings, or what else? It just leads to a lot. I think I overthink it. It doesn't look as natural. It doesn't look as like, fluid or smooth. So I was like, how can I get my work to be as fluid or natural as it could be and just come straight from my subconscious in a way? And the way that I could do that was through sleep deprivation. And I think that urgency, it translates through because of these kind of crises I was having at the time. Just thinking about everything, like literally everything, my gender identity, my relationships, just everything. Like I wanted to transform my entire life while painting this.
Did it work?
A little bit, yeah.
I wonder, and I'd like to get onto this idea of the tortured artist. It's something that's quite mythologized and romanticized throughout history. This idea that artists must bleed for their work and that's it. And actually, it sounds like you're probably not too far off that. Is this an exercise in trying to push that boundary, or is it purely for the self?
I actually have no idea. Maybe something inside me is like trying to play out that narrative. But no, I think this is just how I've always done things. I'm a bit of a extremist when it comes to doing my interests. Like I like to push them as far out as possible and see where I get, really. So I don't know why I do it, but I feel like it gets me somewhere.
Let's really set the scene on this, because I'm interested to know what your kind of sleep deprived self, what state that's like when you're going into work. So talk to me a little bit about that side of the process of how you build up to get into that place.
So it's usually, let's say I come in at 3 p.m., right? That's probably the earliest I'd come into the studio. Well, I usually just sit and research, do a bunch of research, and research is just finding images, watching videos, reading some, literature or academic articles about the topic. So I'm getting really deep into it, and then I'll listen to music in my headphones at blast till it like gives me that notification that says your ears might get damaged or whatever.
Something similar in Guantanamo, I think.
Yeah. I'm not sure why I do that. No, you're making me rethink it a little bit, but no. And then I'll stay up for until the next day, and I might not go home the next day. I might just stay and keep painting. I think that process actually started when I did this project, and I had to paint for 24 hours, and it just felt like the best kind of adrenaline rush. I got addicted to that process a little bit because I just really enjoyed the result, and you can kind of get addicted to the result that you can come with when you're in that state. It's a bit of a manic state, maybe. It's a bit of a trance. I don't feel fully cognitive, which is the best state for me to paint in.
Do you need pain to paint?
A little bit. I'm not saying I start up some drama in my life before my shows. But
just send a couple of really aggressive texts to some people you love. Fuck you.
But I do feel like, that intensity does come up right before the show. It might be the nerves or the stress or whatever. And it just happens to be that before every show, there's just this major life event or something. So it does fuel me in a way.
Does it change then in the relationship to where you are with the show as this show comes closer? Does that change your entire practice and your sense of self? And
definitely. I feel like an evolved person, I think, after like a major project or a solo show. Yeah. It completely changes my own perception of myself and my work and the people around me and everything. It's just all these realizations that happen while you're in that kind of induced state. And I know like some people, they take things to feel that way, but for me it's just painting really, and maybe the fumes of painting. I don't really know.
Yeah, lock all the windows and bring out the good stuff. Do you feel that sense of struggle and conflict does it start to calm for a bit, or does it just permanently swirl? You know, you talk about this being therapy, quite therapeutic.
Yeah, so I think, like I said, I'm really extreme with the things that I do. So now, like, I booked a cabin in the wilderness for a bit. So I'm gonna like completely shut my brain off a little bit. And I think that's just how it is. It's just intense, really intense, and then really just calm.
Has it just always been there, that kind of intensity, that rush?
Definitely.
Noises?
Definitely. Yeah. I think I think maybe previously I didn't know what to do with it. Like it was just frustration and anger and just a lot of irritation. And I think it feels so good to like be able to channel it into something a bit more productive. Maybe it might be, you know, a little bit self-torture, but it feels like self-torture in a slightly positive way, you know?
It's kind of interesting. I'll put my cards on the table. I recently started therapy about a year ago, and I had kind of got to a place where it was just like, I was setting fire to everything, voices, noises, like all that stuff completely resonates with me really, really well. All this idea of this kind of internal, really the fucking emergency, you know, it's like the Molotov cocktail that I've taken to everything. So I since then I've been trying to find, for me it was more drink and drugs that I turned to find that catharsism, but that's just pure escape. So this maybe has more of a kind of like an actual productive side, but it almost, you know, do you feel that relationship with this idea to push the sleep deprivation, do you think that you're in danger of that becoming a toxic relationship?
Maybe. You know, I'll have to think about that, I think looking back at what I used to do and like how I used to cope, this feels like a good step forward. I think, you know, looking back. But maybe I do need to rethink it, but I don't know what I'd put my energy into otherwise, you know what I mean?
I did yoga. I started yoga, like genuinely. It's like I do hot pod yoga, so I go like try to find the most extreme version of yoga that I could find. It's like not just yoga, I want the hot yoga. Like fuck me up yoga. For me, it calmed everything. I was like, okay, cool. I finally found something that feels like it's like a little bit like healthy to help me get out of my head. Where are you in your head then when you're actually painting? You know, you talk about it being kind of like an almost trance. Like, is it just almost like just switching into autopilot and letting it come out?
Yeah, I think I play really loud music and I just move my body, you know, around the canvas really, because I usually paint on the floor, right? So it's really physical, and I'm trying, like I got like a lower back injury, so I'm trying to like not, you know, push myself that hard. So I actually painted the Fistfight show mostly on the wall, but my process is usually just on the floor. Like my head is completely, you know, in a trance state. So I'm not trying to be aware of what I'm doing. I'm just moving my brush around and looking back and seeing, okay, that works. And so that's why I usually like pre-mix everything beforehand, so that I don't have to interrupt that kind of process.
Got to be quite demanding because they're big canvases, and is that the real reasoning behind the size? Because they're almost, you know, borderline mural size.
Yeah.
Is that why, that just to really get that sense of physicality kind of coming through to connect those two?
Definitely. And I did so in the show I do have a few smaller ones, and that was interesting to make because I think when I was and if you look at them a little bit, they don't look as, you know, I don't know how to explain it. They don't look as physical to make as the big ones, but I felt like it was actually a way more therapeutic process to paint those little ones than the big ones. So it's just really interesting to compare the scale and what the scale means when I'm painting it, and how much kind of physical energy I'm putting into the work. But it's definitely, I think the size is definitely intentional.
You think if we have this conversation in 5 years' time, it's all just going to be, you're going to be sitting there going, yep, so I get up at 6, I start painting at 8, I finish at 5, and then I go for a brief, and they're all going to be tiny little miniatures.
I hope so. I probably need to give myself a break at one point.
I'd like to stay in the current show, Fistfights, for a second, because when I was reading the press release, I was really, really kind of pulled into this world of the epic poems and tales of Gilgamesh, and this we're going back 4,000 years into Mesopotamia, and I was like, whoa, okay, cool. I've got no idea what world this is, but I'm interested. Tell me the tale. Where does this interest in mythology come from? Where does this particular attraction towards this time period in this space, and how do you kind of like pull these stories in to start feeding them into your own sense of self-exploration?
Well, that specific interest in Mesopotamia comes from, I went to school in Bahrain. That's where I kind of grew up. I didn't really live there. I used to commute there.
From London?
From Saudi. I never lived in London as a kid.
It's like, that's a big commute. So from Saudi. So there's across the bridge.
Yeah. Across the bridge.
I'm trying to flex that I knew that there was a bridge there.
How did you know that?
I'm glad you asked. Sorry, that was such a shit flex. Oh my God. So anyway, go on.
Yeah, I used to commute there every morning. And then, now I go back to visit my family there. And every time I'm there, I go to the museum there. And the museum just has so many. I mean, the country itself is so interesting because there are so many burial grounds everywhere. Like even around the flat where my parents are staying right now, there's like a huge burial ground. And some of them are protected. Some of them have been bulldozed over. I was just always interested in their burial rituals and like how they treated death, how they viewed death, and how Bahrain itself was like viewed as like the heaven of Mesopotamians. So like throughout of whole Mesopotamia, they would send their dead bodies to Bahrain just to be buried. So it felt like a land of death, but also a land of like living in a way, because that's where they wanted to reincarnate.
Because it was a different sense of what death would be for us, a different way of perceiving it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think being surrounded by death and all these burial grounds is really interesting because it forces you to think about, the unknown when you don't want to.
And particularly in contemporary Western culture, we have a really, really ignorant attitude towards understanding death. I think because we do every single thing in our power to remove our connection to it. We don't think about it. We don't talk about it. We want to preserve our skin. We want to, everything, all the ads that we see are targeted towards youth, billionaires trying to live forever. We're escaping it as much as possible. And I think we've really lost a sense throughout history. At some point, we lost a sense of what death might bring or what it might open or offer us to explore and to have a more holistic relationship with it.
Yeah, I think it's like that whole, capitalism just trying to make us feel a little bit more disconnected with what life means and how death ties into our purpose in a way and how it's inevitable. But I think when you don't think about death, you just have to kind of keep working and not think about that you might just literally be dead and you would have never lived a full life. You've just spent it all working. So I think it does work, right? Like it's worked in the sense that it's numbed people from thinking about it. And maybe that fear is what fuels a lot of, that resistance to speaking about it. Even in Bahrain, I know there's a lot of burial grounds, but death is still a taboo. And I remember I used to go to these death cafes, which were really cool.
Whoa, hold up. You can't just say the phrase death cafe and not expect me to talk about it.
It's a lot more therapeutic than it sounds. It's literally just sitting around talking about death, sharing death stories. Not morbid death stories, like personal death stories. Mm-hmm. And like talking about burial and how we feel about dying and how we feel about people that we've lost. And it's pretty cool. I think I have a really close connection to death because I'm always trying to, it's just this natural human need to answer these existential questions.
It's funny because part of my whole thing is I think about death constantly. And sometimes it's in a really healthy therapeutic way. Sometimes it's really, really not. And I do often wonder how much of that is a result of the taboo that revolves around, talking about or engaging with it in a non-judgmental way, in quite a real way. And I think maybe this has also come with a sense of loss of religion. Throughout Western society, particularly young Western society, we're more increasingly disconnected to that. Our gods are Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg, and that's who we turn to for these. But they can't offer insight into this.
That's so true.
Yeah.
And I think because I grew up in such an extremist, I grew up in an extremist environment. And at times, like the school I went to kind of felt like a death cult in a way. Like just,
Was it secular school?
no, it was an Islamic school, and it was in Saudi when things were, a little bit more extreme in terms of the version of Islam they were teaching at the time. And I think everywhere I went, it was just death and religion and death and religion. Like I'd go to the mall and I'd get a leaflet that says, how you're gonna get tortured in the grave if you don't do these things, or if you don't dress this way. Or so it's just death is constantly being, sold to you as this thing to fear, and to work towards as well, because like you want a good afterlife. So I think that's where my fascination comes from, because they taught us this stuff as young as 4 or 5. Like the minute you enter even preschool, first grade, you're already being taught about death and God and the fear of God.
But it's a fear rather than a kind of an open conversation, and I think that's definitely true on the fringes of quite a lot of these religions, the big religions. I certainly know it would be that if you went to a strict Catholic school in Ireland, 30 years ago, 10 years ago, and I think they would be teaching you that from a young age. These are the rules you follow. If you don't do that, you won't die, you won't get accepted. Or you will die and you won't get accepted into heaven. So was it quite a conservative upbringing for you then?
Not when it came to my parents, and I think that's where the interesting part was, because my mom's family are pretty open as people, and conversations were normal. Like you could talk about anything and you wouldn't be judged. Like even as a kid, I think my uncles really uplifted my voice, in the sense that they would have political conversations or religious conversations or anything, and they would take my opinion into account, even like as young as 6, let's say. So I think talking was encouraged, but then the general culture at the time, and I think in school, there was a lot of repression when it comes to talking about anything.
Are you practicing any religion?
I don't. I've never really practiced. I think there was a time period in my life where I like out of fear I practiced, but my family, they never pressured me to, I think. And that was cool. I had, that religious grandma that wanted me to pray in front of her to prove to her, that I'm doing it. But I think personally, like for me, spirituality is separate from religion. I think growing up, I had a lot of negative feelings about religion. And then I grew up and I realized my feelings are just personal. They're not reflective of what the essence of these religions are. I think it was just a kind of period of, angst. Now I've come to terms with religion in the sense that I view it as like necessary for some people. And I understand why people want that kind of explanation for the world. Because like we said, like death is always on our minds, and we want to explain the afterlife for, have hope that we'll meet with loved ones.
That we're here for something. There's a sense of purpose in their life.
But I think for me, I get my sense of purpose from just knowing that just I'm here and that's it. Maybe it's a bit of an absurdist point of view. I think I was a bit more of a nihilist.
I was about to say, how nihilistic are you? And you said, I'm here for now, and one day I won't be.
No, I was very deep into nihilism, and that didn't lead me to a good place. And I wanted to reconcile like my nihilism with something a bit more optimistic, let's say. And I think, the absurdist point of view that we're just here, but that doesn't mean that we should just die, but we might as well just live for the fuck of it, really. Because why not live, And why not just push it to the limit and like do whatever you want? Because what's the point in dying either? Like if everything's pointless, then why, leap to death when you haven't even fucked around on Earth for a little bit?
I love that. That's probably one of my favorite lines that's ever been said. Why leap to death when you haven't fucked about on Earth? What was your connection then to London? Because obviously I understand the pull and the kind of the safety and everything, but why London?
Why London? I visited here when I was 12. My brother had to get like a heart surgery here. And my dream was always to go to New York. But when I came here,
Love you, London. Second place.
Yeah, London was second place.
Oh, shit.
But I was like, no. I mean, I think I started growing like a few negative feelings about the US and fear. Like, I don't want to get shot, all these things. So I'm like, you know what? Maybe let's not go there. I got a scholarship to come here, to come study at Camberwell. So it was just really convenient.
How did that initial experience of being here sort of change your outlook on, inside and outside?
Yeah. Ooh, how did that change anything? I don't think it changed anything.
Really?
Yeah.
Because just having heard the words that you had previously said, I would have imagined that would have been quite different.
You know what? Maybe I'm not introspective enough to ever think about that, because I do think a lot about other things, but I don't think I've ever thought about how coming here changed my point of view, because I kind of view myself as a set in stone kind of person. I do evolve a little bit. No, I evolve.
Is this because you're a product of the internet?
Yeah, probably.
Because that completely fucked over our sense of like, or it didn't fuck over, it just expanded our world so much. Let's put it that way. And so you were kind of primed and ready for, if you are a self-confessed internet addict, you've seen it.
I've seen it, so I was just ready. Like, I jumped into it and I didn't think about it. I think I was really brave as a teenager, and I never thought of the consequences of anything. So I never came here with fear, really. I think I've grown a little bit more apprehensive as I've grown up. But initially, I was just a really brave kid, and I didn't think about it. I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna, run around the streets of London and be really gay.
I'm just gonna be super gay, even for London.
I was too gay. I was in GAY late every weekend, and then I realized that's probably the worst bar in London.
Yeah, I've only been one time. I couldn't say it was the worst bar. I'm not gonna start going out calling gay safe spaces the worst bar in London. That's gonna get me into trouble.
That's not.
Commercial brief that definitely piqued my interest when I was researching you was the fact that you've created the cover art for not one but two Kanye singles. Have I got that right? Ecstasy, and I love it. My first question is, how did it feel getting what was it? Did Kanye just slide up in your DMs? How did it work?
I got an email from one of the people in charge of the commission, and it was pretty cool. I was shocked when I got it, to be honest. But it was fun. Like, I was apprehensive to do it because I was like, is this real? Like, first of all, is this real? And second of all, I didn't understand where I was found, or like how they even knew I existed as a person, because I had literally just graduated from my illustration degree. So it was pretty insane. So I did work towards briefs then. I think then, because I was like a fresh illustration graduate. But that was one of the funnest things I ever did, really, because I never thought I'd just be sitting there drawing the Kardashians, because I don't think about them. So when it came to painting them, I was like, and I really fucked up their faces pretty bad, and I felt so guilty because I was like, these are people, like, and it looks kind of like a caricature, but it was fun. I think that's what they wanted. Maybe they wanted that kind of. Whenever I paint, I distort things. And when I did that, I think he liked it.
Which is funny because so much of your work is based around exaggerated or disjointed limbs and this kind of blurring of identity and gender and things like that. And then in comes like the archetypal modern day, this is the peak of modern Western femininity, Kim Kardashian and her little army. Like that's like, can you paint Barbie? That kind of like that real idea. And it's coming in from this person that's doing nothing but fuck up these ideals. So was there kind of like a conflict there at all? Or was that something that you were considering?
I was in conflict a lot doing it. I went, when I got that email, I went and DM'd so many people saying, should I do this? And they were like, you're crazy not to. So I think that's how it felt. Like, I was just like, this is fun. Like, I don't have to view it in such a complex way other than this is a fun commission for a fun project. And let me just get involved in something that might be, life-changing or just fun because I never see I was a fan of, you know, Kanye's music at the time, but I wasn't like a super fan. And I knew of the Kardashians, but I didn't know much about them. So I think it was just interesting that they picked me because I really had no reaction to it when it came to like who they were, because I have no interest in like celebrity culture. And I was like, oh, that was it.
I know this guy's name. I've seen this somewhere.
Yeah, it's pretty funny because I have some friends who are, you know, huge fans, and I think they went crazy for it. But I try and like keep myself neutral when it comes to most things. I don't like to hype myself up a little bit too much.
I like that. Keep it humble. Is there an album? This is kind of a dumb question. Is there an album, since you've done the cover art for Kanye, is there an album that you wish you had made the art for?
Oh, that's a really good question because I always think of that. I do. I genuinely do. Like sometimes I look at album covers, I'm like, that could have been me. Like I could have done.
But I would have done this. You fucked up there. You should have done this.
Which album is it? I don't think I have like one album, but I think like any like I love Solange, so maybe Solange. It would have been cool to work with her, but there isn't one album.
Okay, but we'll manifest Solange just now, right? Okay, we'll manifest that, put it out there. If your creative team is watching or listening just now, Solange, what have you got coming up? You've obviously just opened the show, but you seem like a busy person. I don't get the sense that this is you doing a solo and then cooling it off for another 6 months while you go sit in your log cabin in the woods. What's coming up for you?
I have a solo show coming up late November with Steve Turner in LA, so that will be fun. I still don't know what I'm gonna paint, so I'm just gonna get into it and do this whole thing all over again. The sleep deprivation. It's gonna be another round of it in October. Okay. Yeah.
How long is that process? How long does the show take you to paint?
Around a month.
Fuck.
It's an intense month.
Wow, that is intense.
I used to paint them in a day, but I think like my body's giving out on me a little bit, so a little bit. I think maybe 3 days or 2 days. Yeah, I try and keep it at a limit because I don't want to overwork it, don't want to overthink it, so I just like to get it out of my way. I hate looking at them when I'm done with them, so I just want to roll them up.
Because you want to go in and change things?
Yeah. Or I start to hate them and I'm like, I don't even want them in the show anymore. They just they kind of stare at me. And they are.
And what is it that bugs you about that then when you're looking back at one of your paintings?
I'm not sure. They feel a bit too, it's like looking at a photo of yourself. You don't want to look at yourself for too long.